Well, greetings, everybody. I'm very pleased today to have Nick Ward. Some of you will know, or many will actually know, from Gold Bullion Partners, and he's very kindly come onto the channel to have a chat about things. With Nick, he's in the trenches, as it were. He's on the sharp end. I tend to take geopolitical, strategic views of things, as all my followers know, but Nick is actually dealing day by day, and so he's very, very close to what's happening, what's going on, and some of the questions that are being asked. So I'm going to let him have his head a little bit on this one. And we're really talking about, I mean, I made my, such money as I made, which isn't a great deal, was in equities in the 90s, and I went into gold. I became a gold bug in the late in about 1998, I think, when Gordon Brown was selling it, and I knew I had to buy it then because he's an economical retard, and so I knew that is the time to get stuck into gold, and I did, and I've been in gold ever since. But I'm an old man now, so things move around, asset classes move around. So we're directing this a little bit, this little chat, because to those of you who are thinking of unwinding property positions for whatever reason, largely, of course, government hostility. And ironically enough, I now am that man. I have a small holding, as many of you know, in Yorkshire with a couple of cottages on it, holiday cottages and a house. And I've got to the stage now at my age, I want to consolidate whatever we've got, my wife and I, and we're unloading a bit of property ourselves. Now is the time, but I'm not going to waffle on. I'm going to hand it over to Nick. Tell me, Nick, tell us all what's going on in the marketplace.
Of course, well, pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on again, Godfrey. Always a pleasure. But yeah, you're right. There really is so much uncertainty in the market at the moment. It doesn't matter where you look. But in particular, a lot of property owners and investors are sitting there paralyzed with fear and unsure of what to do. You've got the economy on the one hand and a government that's trying to attack them on another. Is the market going to go bust, or will they be regulated and taxed out of existence? So everyone is now asking, how can I preserve my wealth against inflation, and what's the best asset to do that moving forward? How can they plan for their retirement, or even leave a legacy to their kids or their grandkids? And yes, traditionally, property obviously used to be the answer to that. It used to fill that void in the UK, but it's now looking like that heyday is coming to an end, well and truly. We've got an aging population who has done well out of it, but given how market dynamics are changing, it's no longer an attractive proposition later in life. And I think, Godfrey, the older people get, the less complicated they want their life to be. They still want to preserve everything they've worked hard for, but obviously in a much simpler and safer fashion than they can obviously do in property at the moment. So yeah, I just wanted to give some perspective to start with, really, as to the property market, where we actually are, what we're seeing, and obviously your audience can then get an idea as to how this is going to play out and where it's likely to go. So if you just cast your mind actually back to 2020, 2019, 2020, and we can see how the environment's actually been artificially manufactured, and how we've currently ended up in this situation. And as you well know, Godfrey, during 2021, 2022, with the lockdowns in place, people were basically borrowing for free. Cheap mortgages were being thrown out there, money was being pumped into the system, and everyone was being encouraged, actively so, to do it and to take out huge loans and leverage, basically above their means. When most people realized the world wasn't going to end, obviously that caused a huge rush into the property market. And I think the average house price went up to about 275,000. But almost overnight, of course, interest rates then shot back up from 0.1% to 5.2%, which caught most people out and resulted in a huge swathe of buyers being enslaved to this debt-based system, to the fiat system. You can argue, was that by design? I do think it was, but that's neither here nor there for now. But despite that, even though this is happening and people are really struggling to meet a lot of their rental payments, you'll notice that house prices haven't really moved. On the face of it, they pretty much stayed exactly the same. So although they appear stable, inflation's actually starting to run a lot hotter. The government will tell you it's 2-3%. In actual fact, it's probably closer to 20%. So what people aren't actually aware of is houses have held their value, but they've suddenly become cheaper in comparison to everything else. So rents, wages, groceries, I mean, you name it. And although we don't hear about it in the news, inflation adjusted prices of property have now actually fallen by about 15%, 15% in about 18 months, which if you look at it is probably the biggest drop since 2008. It's a silent crash. It's quite nefarious. No one can see what's going on, but it's a form of kind of silent crash. And now, of course, we've had Labour come into power. Mortgage rates are still stubbornly high. You've got a whole raft of new regulations. And I think a lot of investors, at least what we're seeing here in the trenches, as you mentioned earlier, is they're looking for that exit plan. We've got 10,000 millionaires that have left the country in the last 5 to 6 months. About 40% of landlords are now trying to offload their property. But at the same time, you have the mainstream, the establishment, the mainstream media, a lot of estate agents, commentators, trying to pretend like the market's still strong, the sentiment's still there. And people saying, look, property prices haven't fallen. With everything going on with these nutters in charge, they haven't come down one bit. People aren't in negative equity. They're getting accustomed to these higher rates. But in actual reality, the market is declining. You just can't see it because it's not adjusted for inflation. So I think it's more akin to a Jenga tower that's slowly having pieces taken out of it over time without people actually knowing. And whilst it's standing tall at the moment, it just takes an increase in interest rates, for example, and the entire structure could come collapsing down.
Something else I wanted you just to talk to us about, Nick, is there is such a degree of hostility by this government to private landlords because they can't control private landlords and they want to be able to control. It's all about control. And that's why, of course, we see some very big international players going in and out of number 10 Downing Street. Some of the big corporate.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And of course, the same with farmland, which isn't our particular bag here, but it's the same with farm. Just gallop through that, Nick, if you'd be so kind.
Well, absolutely. Farmers are actually one of our largest kind of clients, to be honest with you, next to people selling property, Godfrey. You're right. But yeah, there's been a huge war on landlords with the rental reforms that are coming through. And obviously Labour are pushing through the Renters' Rights Bill. I think it's coming into effect in October. So you'll no longer, as a landlord, have the right to no fault eviction. I think they call it a Section 21. But basically, tenants will be able to stay indefinitely in your property unless they choose to leave. So you can't kick them out. And if you do kick them out, there's even talk of giving you a 2-year jail sentence for doing it. That's what they're trialing up in Scotland at the moment. So ultimately, it's obvious they do not want private landlords. The only people benefiting from this are the large corporations who can deal with all this excessive red tape and obviously any losses that they'll experience in the short term is a bit of a loss leader for them. So some of the large retail banking names even are now becoming landlords. It's crazy. It's not just the likes of BlackRock. Everyone's getting in on the game. And I speak to landlords who just stay awake at night worrying about the amount of legislation that they've got to go through, all the hoops that they have to jump through. Have they carried out the right rent checks? If not, they're after you. So what obviously people like about gold is it's physical, it's tangible, just like bricks and mortar, but with none of the hassle. The estate agents, the solicitors, the gazundering, maintenance, and of course, no tax. So yes, whilst gold might not provide an income, all the growth that you do get from it is still going to outperform any returns that you might get in your property. it's just going to be completely devoid of taxation. And that's just what's so important. People want an easy life. They don't want to have to deal with this excessive bureaucracy and government regulation anymore. And the government know that, and that's why they're creating the in for the corporations to take over so much of the property, which really worries me actually, because you'll end up with some neo-feudalistic type states where property is all owned by a few mega corporations that are in cahoots with the government, and ultimately nobody has rights or access to their own place anymore. Everyone's indefinitely renting. It's worrying. It really does worry me.
Reminds me of two quotes. And I'll just shove a couple of quotes in there, if I may. One is J.P. Morgan in 1912. Only gold is money. All right.
Yeah.
Let that sink in, viewers, subscribers. Only gold is money. End of. And it has been since the Roman Empire. And the second thing is 1926, Henry Ford. Another great quote is, if people understood how banks work, they would never put their money in a bank. Look it up. You can find it in the Oxford Book of Quotations, and it's as true today as it ever was.
And to put it into perspective again, I think, well, I mean, you'll remember this, Godfrey. If you cast your mind back to the 1970s, market conditions are so reminiscent of what they were back then. If the government were forced to increase interest rates to defend a collapsing currency, or if inflation gets out of control, you'll end up with a mortgage famine like we saw in 1973 or 1974. I'm sure you can remember exactly what happened then.
I remember it extremely well. I had two houses at that time. I was working in the city, but I also was doing other things. I had two houses, not as important, one in London and one in Nottingham. And I didn't want two houses, and so I decided to put them on the market. But there was a mortgage crash. There was a credit crunch. And this is an interesting point with a lot of people, unless they're very old geezers like me, won't remember. And that is, you can't knock 10 grand off the price of the house. You can't knock 25 grand off the price of the house. You won't sell it at any price because there's no money. And nobody ever buys, or very few people buy a property for cash. Most of us buy it on mortgage. And of course, the next one was 1989, which I remember because my father had the bloody impertinence to die in 1989, leave me a very nice house, and my two sisters. And you couldn't shift it. It's in the best part of Bromley. It was Keston Gardens, Keston Ponds, down in that way. It was a poor end of the stockbroker belt, 3-bedroom detached house with a nice little private garden. We couldn't give it away. It was on the market for 2 years, and eventually it sold for 126,000. But you've got to be a relatively old geezer now to remember any of this. And it's coming again. And it won't
most people can't. Exactly.
They can't see it.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it sometimes. And it isn't like a lot of commodities, supply and demand. It's credit. It's the world of credit. And when you turn off the credit tap, of course, that's when you can't sell houses. And you see forests in 1974 and 1980. You go through a suburb or you go through a small town, there are forests of for sale signs. Forests. Almost every house, because people sometimes have to just get out. They can't afford the mortgage if they didn't have fixed mortgage. So, but of course, that's not quite the market we're talking about today, Nick. We're talking about people who now are getting to the stage where they're probably grandparents and all the rest of it, and they've got a buy-to-let, maybe a couple of buy-to-lets or something like that, and they want to unwind that position. And they want to make sure they preserve the wealth they've got. They've done well. They've done nicely in property, thank you very much, as I did nicely in equities in the 90s. But now they want out. And I think still a lot of people are scratching their heads because still most people don't have gold. They just don't have it. The central banks have got it all. But Mr. and Mrs. Snooksy at 27 to Casey Avenue ought to have some, don't. Talk us into that.
Yeah, of course. We speak to a lot of developers, lenders, investors, and they think the very best case scenario you're going to get from property now is about an increase of 3% a year. So if somebody does have, say, £500,000 there that they've got sat in the bank doing nothing, losing place to inflation, best case scenario in 5 years, you'd be turning that into about 560,000, 570,000. But of course, if you were to put that into gold, um, over the last 5 years, that 500,000 would now be worth about 895,000. But of course, without any of the stress, the grief, or the tax that comes with property now. So yes, where else can they put their money in an inflationary environment? And I think we both agree that we are going to into an inflationary melt up. They'll carry on trying to kick the can down the road. There's only so long they can do that, but they're going to open up the money printers. It's not going to work in property anymore. The only asset that is sensitive to inflation and goes up more than anything else, of course, are the metals. Every major central bank are suggesting that they're going to slash interest rates. So the money printer is going to carry on. And if they leave it in cash, well, it's like a melting ice cube. It's going to go to nothing.
I was around, Nick, talking of inflation, to pick up on that point, which you make, which is a very good one, very important one. There's still a lot of people who haven't seen it in a lump, in a lump, you know, in a crisis situation. In 1973, 1974, when interest rates, bond interest rate, gilt rates went to something like 17 or 18% in 1973, 74. And if you went into your corner shop, days when we had corner shops, and you bought sort of a jar of coffee or something like that, there'd be 5 or 6 labels on the top. They were relabeling it
Wow.
literally daily. I was a young man, I would be about 24, 25 years old, and it was a really weird phenomenon. And I'm talking, we're doing this, I'm talking here from Great Ayton, which is in North Yorkshire. I'm always buzzing around the place, as you well know. Now, it's interesting. Okay, Londoners might not think this is very important, but anybody outside London, we went to a very good fish and chip shop in Saltburn by the Sea, which we know, very good quality. You can only get fish and chips in Yorkshire, of course, anyway. You can't get it anywhere else, to be frank. So we had now 2 sort of fish and chips, haddock and chips, and a cup of tea. That was £36. And then we had 2 scoop ice cream on the way down as we went down the front at Saltburn. That was £5 each. Now, this is what we're talking about. This is, people go, oh, yeah, what of it kind of thing. But just a minute, even only a few years ago, the fish and chips would have been half that price. So as you rightly say, real inflation, the things that we do like buy fish and chips or buy ice cream or pay the electricity bill, has got nothing to do with what the government says, 2 or 3%. That's just straight lies. But then I know people will be watching, they'll be shocked. They'll be, Keir Starmer lying? Surely not.
And that's what property is coming down against every other asset. So whilst everything else is going up, property is just pretty much doing nothing. So it's actually declining in real terms. But one of the other issues you've really got to address when it comes to property is liquidity and inheritance tax. And look, we're going through one of the largest wealth transfers we've seen in history. And as the baby boomers age, the flow of wealth, I think I read the other day, it's estimated to be about 150 billion a year in the UK that's being passed on from the older generation to the younger. So that obviously raises the question of inheritance and legacy planning, which is so key. Now, at the moment, the tax-free allowance for inheritance tax that everybody's allowed is £325,000, which doesn't really get you too far in this day and age. And of course, they've deliberately kept it fixed at that rate, which means that everybody is being hit by it because of something called fiscal drag, of course. So everybody slowly creeps into the threshold, even by owning an average size property. Now, what people just don't realize, and what we see here day in, day out, is that when you do pass away, HMRC expect all liquid assets of an estate, so the cash, of course, to be used to settle as much of that inheritance tax bill as possible. Now, if the liquid funds are insufficient to cover the full liability of that, you've got to raise the money from the other assets of the estate, but only, of course, once probate's granted. But what's the big concern here is that inheritance tax has to be paid actually within 6 months, Godfrey, 6 months of someone's death. And it is catching out so many of our clients. It's just not long enough. look, particularly if they're selling property, I mean, that's another issue, but probate takes at least 6 months to sort out, if not in excess of a year. I mean, I've had some people with it going on for 2 years.
Mhm.
The assets usually haven't been released from the estate by the time the tax falls due. And if the main asset is property, which it inevitably is for the older generation, that has to be sold to pay the tax. But the kicker is HMRC will start charging you interest once those 6 months are up. And you then become indebted to them because the property can't be sold quickly enough. It's not liquid. It's archaic. The government aren't looking to help you. But that's why so many of our clients are thinking ahead now and just taking those proactive steps to simplify their portfolios for their family members, their loved ones. It's almost like the entire system has been designed to catch you out. No one wants to think about legacy planning. Everyone puts their head in the sand, but people owe it to themselves not to pass that liability on. And that's the danger with these large property portfolios that we've seen that people have. They're making the property market the perfect asset to control you because it's just not flexible. You can't just up sticks and leave and take your gold like you can with gold and take it with you. You're stuck there. And if you can't sell it, or if the market tanks, or if they whack up interest rates, like again, the 1970s, you've had a family member die, you can't flog the estate and it's worth less. Well, you're then indebted to HMRC and having to pay them interest on an unpaid tax bill. So, and that is what's really, really worrying. And I've seen that happen now 3 times in the last month.
It is extraordinary, is it not? That it could be. I mean, that threshold is a suburban bungalow in the provinces.
Yes.
I mean, so there's almost nobody it doesn't encompass to some extent. And everybody thinks of, inheritance tax, so I'm not rich enough to pay inheritance. That's a generally held view. Whereas, as you say, you can pick the phone up. Well, I'm not going to steal your thunder. You're coming onto that, but you can, if you've got gold, you can pick the phone up and you can sell it. You can sell it, as I sold a little bit yesterday to help out a chum. I picked the phone up and sold it. Absolutely marvelous. Tell us now. People are going, I thought about that. Yeah, I think he's right. I know he's right. I haven't done anything. I've been dithering about. What do I do? What is the doing thing, as we used to say in the old training courses in commerce? And what's the doing thing when people have finished the video? What do they actually do? They give you a bell and say, look, I've got X. What do I do with it? Where's it stored? Do I store it? Do I take delivery? Can you run us through that, please, Nick?
Of course, yeah. So you can either take delivery of it and bury it in your back garden if you so wanted, put it behind the chimney flute, in the attic, underneath the floorboards, wherever you like. And you can store £1 million worth of gold pretty easily. Alternatively, you can vault it with us either in Switzerland or in London. But the main thing to consider is if you buy the right type of gold, so gold bullion sovereigns, you're not paying any capital gains tax on that at all. So obviously with property, you've got to pay a huge sum of it away to the government. With gold, there's nothing. So I always suggest to clients 95% of the time, always go for the coins, not the bars. It makes no difference whether you've taken delivery of it.
Absolutely.
And you can pass it on then, leave a treasure map to your grandkids if you want and bury it in the garden. Alternatively, if you want that instantaneous means of liquidity, you can just pick up the phone, sell it, and have the funds transferred back to your account within 2 hours. You don't have to get it back to us. But it's portable, it's flexible. If you're going to move abroad, it gives you that privacy. There's talk of them introducing capital controls. No good if you've got a big property portfolio because they can just steal it off you. If you've got gold, you've got that luxury of moving wherever you want in the world, and it's internationally liquid. Wherever you go, you're going to be able to sell it very easily and very quickly. But the benefit, of course, of buying coins in the UK is there is no capital gains tax to pay at all. It's one of the last tax-free forms of private investment left in the UK. And people are realizing, well, what's the point in keeping it in the bank? The banks aren't safe. Inflation's robbing me blind. Where else can I put it? It sells itself, Godfrey, really, at the moment. It really does.
Well, it does. I'll just step in very quickly there because it's something else that people probably won't be aware of. The Bank Charter Act, I think it was 1844, means that when you put your money into a bank, it becomes theirs. Your account statement is a promissory note. As Michael Kay was saying, not a lot of people know that. So consequently, don't think if you put it on deposit, it's risk-free. It most certainly
No,
isn't.
not at
And
all.
the state of banks, and I plug my book for a little bit, The Magic of Banking, shows you exactly how insolvent they are. My speeches in the European Union Parliament, how they're all broke, they're all insolvent. And this is something, but your bank, you put your money in your bank, that is not safe, that is not okay. It won't necessarily be. And if there'll be some of you, and you and I have experienced this over the last few years, haven't we? You go into your bank, anybody listening to this, and say, "Oh, I've got £50,000 in my credit in my deposit." Go and ask for it back. Go and ask for it back, and you'll soon find out whose money it is.
Godfrey, I've got clients having their accounts suspended at the moment. They cannot get their money out. A couple of high street names, I won't mention names, but some of the more prominent ones, building societies, they cannot get their money out, regardless if it's 5 grand, 10 grand, or 200,000. And that's because ultimately you do not own that money in the bank. So the bank, the legal owners of the money, you simply have a right to it. And that's because fractional reserve banking means that every pound there is being lent out 100 times over in order to chase yield and return, all the while paying everybody a pittance on the pound on something that doesn't even exist. I mean, all money is time. And I want my time being wrapped up in the hardest form of currency, which is gold, not in a digital asset on a screen that's been made up out of thin air. That's going to rob me of my time in the future through inflation. Exactly
right. And a lot of people. Well, we'll wrap up now, because I think that's given people a lot of information. Now I know there are many dealers, and I know many of them personally. And my website guides you, for those of you who want to look at the website, which is attached to this. You can have a look. But if you want to speak to Nick, give him the link is there. Two things I would say to you, if you're listening to this. If you look at my website, there's so much on it. It's one of the biggest, most comprehensive independent websites in Britain today. Before you buy any gold from anybody, make yourself much more informed about all these matters. And I hope this video's informed you a bit. Then everybody's personal, everybody's private, everybody's got their own little world of problems. Then if you phone Nick, if you want to phone Nick at Gold Bullion Partners, or perhaps anybody else that you want to phone, but do speak to somebody who knows what they're talking about and can help you, because your problem won't be new to Nick, even if it's new to you. So you can have a little chat and see what you think. So and you'll find, of course, Nick's website is very comprehensive as well. Gold Bullion Partners, it's very comprehensive, and if Nick's not there, he's got colleagues who can talk to you as well. And if it's a big amount, if it's a significant amount, and when I say significant amount, if it's over £50,000, if you email me on my website, I'll have a look at it, answer any problems you've got, and I will point you in the direction of the right dealer that I think is right for you. So that will help everybody. Do you want to add anything, Nick, at all to that before we wrap up?
Feel free to reach out, give us a call, send me an email. You can get me at nicholas@goldbullionpartners.co.uk. But absolutely, we just want people to understand what is going on right now, and regardless of whether you've got £5,000 or £10,000 and you've never made an investment at all before, or you've got 5 million, everyone just is looking for that protection, because we know what's coming. It's just a matter of how long they can put us through this wealth grab until everybody finds out the game's up. So don't feel like we only deal with larger investors or anything like that. We certainly don't. We're here to cater for everybody.
And bear in mind, just to finish up on this, you have to have talk to Nick, or talk to people about, or look at my website about time appreciation. Don't buy for next Christmas. You're not. That gold is a reserve of wealth. It's a reserve of wealth. So you've got to be prepared when you've got it, because it does move about a bit. Nothing is in a straight line. So when you do buy some gold, if you do buy some gold, the golden rule is make sure it's coins. of the realm, sovereigns or Britannias, make sure it's that absolutely, and the bullet points are on my website. And be prepared to hold for really quite a time. If you're considering holding for less than 2 or 3 years, it's really not for you in my view. But if you talk through with Nick or Nick's colleagues or anything like that, you'll find that they'll be sympathetic, and I hope you have a good experience. Thank you again for coming on, Nick. Thank you again for coming on.
Always a pleasure.
Good to see you.
Yeah, look forward to speaking again soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.